Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. MBOM is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at MBOM, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hey friends, I just wanted to pop in and talk a little bit about MBO behind the scenes. When I entered the yoga world as a teacher, I was surprised by how many yoga teachers were struggling with the business side of yoga. And that's why I created MBOM. MBOM helps yoga teachers and studio owners become entrepreneurs. It helps you to go from surviving to thriving with your yoga business. I am on a mission to change the yoga industry, to teach yoga teachers and studio owners about the business of yoga, and to help you feel more confident, successful, and abundant. After releasing hundreds of podcast episodes, I want to create content that dives deeper into helping yoga entrepreneurs thrive and elevate their businesses. This is where MBO Behind the Scenes comes in. Each week, you will get bonus content from the weekly guest or myself, diving deeper into how you can take the teachings and apply them to your business. This podcast is designed for yoga teachers and studio owners who are ready to take it to the next level. If you enjoy MBOM and have been looking for an affordable way to learn more, this is it. For the cost of 2 lattes per month, you will get never-before-heard content that you can't access anywhere else that will give you tangible ways to dive deeper into your yoga business. If this sounds like something you're interested in, let's dive in. Head on over to patreon.com/MBOM yoga and sign up to get behind the scenes now. Once again, that's patreon.com/MBOM yoga to get all the exclusive behind the scenes content. I'll see you there. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the MBOM podcast. I am so excited that you've decided to join me for today's episode of the show. This episode of the podcast is brought to you in partnership with Offering Tree. Offering Tree makes digital marketing fun, easy, and affordable. They are your one-stop shop for your website, scheduling software, membership management, payment, email newsletter, and more. Keep listening to hear how you can use Offering Tree to spend more time teaching and less time managing. Now, on today's episode of the show, I am very excited to be joined by Danu. Nick is a longtime listener of the podcast and a fellow Canadian, so she's been in my network for a little while now, and I love following her and all the work that she does. She is a yoga teacher, a yoga business consultant, a yin yoga teacher training, as well as a yoga therapist. And today on the podcast, we are going to dive into websites. Now, if you guys have listened to the podcast for any length of time, you know I am super passionate about yoga teachers having websites. And so on this episode of the show, we're going to dive into 5 mistakes that yoga teachers make on their websites and then what to do instead. So hopefully you will feel like you understand how to create a really great yoga teacher website by the end of this episode with Nick. So I hope that you enjoy this information as much as I did. I hope that you learn a lot. And without further ado, here is Nick. Welcome to the podcast today, Nick. I'm super excited to have you here with me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited to have this conversation. I know this is going to be a super valuable conversation for yoga teachers, but before we dive into kind of the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about today, I'd love to hear how you first got into yoga and a little bit about your yoga story.
Okay. I started yoga back in 1998. That was my first class. At the time, I was a hairstylist, and one of the girls that I worked with thought it would be a fun idea if all of us got together on a Monday, which is what a hairdresser's day off oftentimes, and we all signed up for this beginner yoga class and went together. And so it was a Monday morning, and I'm not a morning person, nor did I have any desire for yoga. Yoga, as it had been presented to me back then, this is before there was a yoga boom, of course, was the PBS special with, I think her name is Lilith Forlin. I'm probably saying her name wrong. You know, she was a silhouette in a unitard with a long braid doing sun salutations. And I'm a, ex-punk rocker, heavy music loving kind of kid. And so there was nothing about that said, oh, this is something you should do. And so I was very resistant, especially because also not being a morning person and it being on a Monday. And so I kept saying no. And finally, she promised door-to-door service and lattes. So I said, okay, fine. I'll go with the rest of the group and we'll take this beginner yoga class, begrudgingly rolling my eyes the whole time. And then I went to my first class and completely fell in love. Right from that first moment, I was like, that is one of the first things I had said to them after class was, I'm going to do yoga forever. I was like completely all in. I was hooked. I had never felt so calm and centered and floaty all at the same time. And I also, because I have a tendency towards anxiety and have my whole childhood, had never actually spent any time just doing one thing like that before. My mind had been focused completely on one thing while I was doing it. It wasn't darting all over the place. And yeah, I just left feeling sort of like this yoga was this magical unicorn thing. And so I kept doing it on and off for a few years. I'd do a registered session and then I would, take a session off and say, oh, I'll do yoga at home. And then I would, I'd do the whole 4 poses that I remembered how to do at home. And then I'd go back. And so this went on for a few years. And this is before there was like YouTube or, any online yoga that you could find. So when I was doing it at home, I was literally going by memory or by a book. And then I would go back and study with the teacher. And this kind of went on for several years. And at a certain point, I was a hairstylist, as I mentioned, and I was suffering with a lot of work-related injuries, which is quite common actually in that industry. And so I was in a lot of pain, and my hours were being cut because by myself, I was cutting my own hours because I was in too much pain. And so I was now working, 4 days a week, and I could see that in the future that could probably be 3 days a week. And it just got me starting to think that like a plan B would be a smart move. And as a hairstylist, I was also an educator and a platform artist. And if you don't know what a platform artist is, they're the hairdressers that get paid to go on the road and do the hair shows. So they're on stage and they're doing the hair live. And so there's the models and the mics and the music and the makeup. And it's sort of like if you combined a rock concert, a fashion show, and then threw some hair in. It's kind of like,
oh yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I was traveling a lot over Canada and doing that. And I loved that work. But then I was coming back to the salon and working through pain, and the work was not as creatively fulfilling. It was a lot of, repetition, same blonde highlights over and over and over again. And it was just starting to lose its magic for me, except when I was on the road, which in Canada, where you and I live, you can't actually do platform artistry full time. There's just not enough of a hair show season that you could do that and not work in a salon. So you always have to work in a salon as well. And that's where it was starting to get a bit much for me. Just was feeling stifling, and I wasn't feeling as fulfilled, and I was doing more and more yoga. And I'd always had a bit of a closet Buddhist side as well. And so I had been reading some Buddhist books and some philosophy. And I just started spending more and more time doing yoga and reading about these things, and less time sort of interested in doing hair. And then I had a friend who was a hairstylist who overnight, she found out that the allergy that she had was due to the hair color she was using, and had to completely let go of doing hair. She couldn't even be in the room with it, and had no plan B for a career. And that really kind of struck me that, here I am working injured, and I'm spending a ton of money on medical stuff like chiropractics and massage, and still working in pain, even though doing that, and that I didn't have a plan B. So I really started thinking about that. And because I'd been doing hair right out of high school, essentially, I apprenticed and then started right away, and had always done something I loved, I was a bit spoiled And I couldn't imagine then going and just getting like a job that I didn't like and that I wouldn't be sort of sovereign over. I couldn't imagine going to go work for someone else, like in an office and I had done, while I was building up my hair career, I had done other things on the side, as you do, your side hustles when you're building. I bartended and baristaed and waitressed, and I didn't want to do that full time forever either. So I really just started sitting with it and thinking about what else would I do for a living. And I realized that I really loved teaching. And that was the aspect of being on the road and being a hair color educator that was so exciting, was the teaching. And that I really loved yoga. And so it just kind of felt like, well, that's a smart fit. If you love yoga and you love teaching and you already have experience teaching, it would make sense to switch the subject matter of your teaching to yoga. So I researched out some teacher trainings, and my first teacher training was in 2004, and that was a 300-hour, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it back then, Yoga Alliance wasn't what it is today, and so it wasn't sort of dominating how teacher trainings were run. And so this one had a year of study, and then we had 25 hours of like mentorship, and then 75 hours of apprenticeship.
Oh,
So
wow.
we got, it was
That
so
sounds
good.
amazing.
This is the model I think most people should do, because it's so different when you, you're just teaching your cohorts in your teacher training. You're not actually teaching like the regular people. And then you go, to teach your first class after teacher training, and you're standing at the front of the room, totally unprepared. So this really allowed me to be at the front of the room with the teacher right beside her for 75 hours and help people and, go get a block for this person and help this person with that. And also really to be able to witness, okay, she's saying the same thing and it's landing differently for 5 different people. What is, what languaging could be used, and like, what does this person need? And so it really gave me a position of being able to just see bodies and how people interpreted your words for a good chunk of time. So that was my first teacher training, and I finished that one in 05. Actually, sorry, I started in 03 and very end of 03, and then the whole year of 2004. And then just when I finished, it was 2004, and then I started teaching very early 2005. So
And
that
did you do
was,
your teacher training in Calgary, or where did you do that
I
training?
did actually. The program is no longer there. It was, when I first signed up for it, it was called the Yoga Studio. There was a south and a north location, and they each had their own teacher training programs. And then they would merge us for a few workshops.
Mm-hmm.
And then partway through that training, even the director changed the name. And then I believe he went by the Yoga College of Canada. And so by the time I was finished, that's what it was. And now he's actually left that studio altogether and has a different teacher training program that he's running. So it's like the program that I took in the way that I took it is no longer there.
Okay, gotcha. Do you know what's interesting is that I guess the first studio that I actually practiced at was the yoga studio in Crowfoot.
Oh yeah. So this was the south location that I took my training through.
Oh, that's awesome. It's such a small world. I love that.
Totally. Yeah, so I finished and I started teaching, and that was like 15 years ago or something like that, if I'm doing my math correctly. And since then, I've also added 500 hours of yin training with my teacher, Paul Grilly, and a yoga therapy as well. So I have an additional 800, and I'm a registered yoga therapist.
Wow, you've done a lot over the last, I guess, 15 years is quite a while to expand your career, but that's amazing that you've done so much training. And are you still doing hair at all, or did you let that go at some point?
No, I had to let it go completely. And it was hard to, because of course you have your favorite clients, and then you have family, and everyone's like, oh, but you're still going to do just a few people in your, in your kitchen, so to speak. And it was like, no, because then how do I decide, okay, you and you, but not you. And also my love was hair color. That's what my expertise was in. And so the overhead to order like a full line of hair color to keep in your house. It was like, why would I spend thousands of dollars on hair color to keep in milk crates in case you want to change your color next week,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it just became clear that I needed to do a clean break. And initially I thought that I was going to keep doing hair and then just cut my hours and then start teaching yoga, and that these things would kind of work symbiotically together. And then eventually I would, just shift over to more yoga. And it's what I tried to do. But all of the classes that kept getting kind of offered to me were on days where I really had to be at the salon because those were the busy days. And I was feeling pretty frustrated about that. And I went home and, telling my partner, I was like, I don't understand. Why can't someone just offer me a Monday yoga class on my day off? And he said, well, why don't you just quit? And I was like, what do you mean just quit? Like, just quit my job? I suffer from over responsibility, if anything. So I was like, just not have a job? And he said, yeah, our bills are cheap right now and I'm working full time. And like, why don't you just quit doing hair so that you can focus 100% on building your yoga? And it was like it's like he was speaking another language to me. Like I just couldn't even understand how I could just like not have a job. But eventually I sat with it and I did. So I took him up on his offer and I quit doing hair outright. I mean, I gave months notice, but I was just like, as of this date, I'm done. And, started looking for teaching gigs. Now, I did get a part-time barista job because like I said, overly responsible. I was like, I can't just not work at all.
I know. I feel you on this. So yeah. I'm with you.
Yeah. I was like, what do you mean not work? Maybe it's an Alberta girl thing,
maybe
hardworking gals, So it was very clear to me that I would not be able to just sit around the house and only hand out yoga resumes until something happened. So, I baristaed part-time, which was a perfect compliment actually, because the hours were really flexible and I could start with a lot of hours. And then as I built classes, I could reduce them to the point where when I had 10 classes, I was just like, okay, no more baristing. But even then I was going to keep that job. And again, my partner, words of wisdom, was like, why are you keeping your barista job? I was like, well, I'm teaching 10 classes right now, but what if in the summer it goes down to 7? And he's like, you don't think that they're going to be always looking for baristas? Especially ones that are, qualified. And I was like, oh, good point. It's like, there's no need to work like a whole year in case it slows down in the summer, So then I finally quit that. And then it was full-time yogi.
Wow. That's amazing. Good for you for making that jump. And, like I said, I totally feel you. I've definitely held on to lots of side jobs. And I mean, quite honestly, still do things like that. So yeah, maybe it's just something about how we were raised or something like that. I'm not too sure, but I think it is like, it's nice to kind of have that security blanket sometimes. But then at the same time, there's something about like fully committing yourself to what you're doing and really taking that leap of faith and believing in yourself. Because something I found is like, and this is totally different based on need, because obviously there's the financial aspect is very important and we have to pay our rent and pay our bills and stuff like that. But sometimes I feel like it's like, oh, I actually have made enough money to pay all that stuff, but I've just, kept these other things just kind of as this like security blanket for myself, or to make sure I have money in case, my car breaks down or, God forbid something bad happens and that sort of thing.
The backup plan.
Yeah, exactly. The backup plan. And so you've been teaching yoga full time for like 15 years now. And I'd be curious if we can just kind of touch a little bit on, what has sort of shifted for you from, being a brand new yoga teacher to where you're at now with your yoga business.
Well, from the business side of things, I, like many fresh, new, excited, eager teachers, thought that I was just going to roll out of my teacher training, hand out some resumes. Because of course I'd never actually crunched the numbers. Like I'd never actually sat down with like, what does the average yoga teacher make? And like figured out how many classes a month would you need in order to do that? And, which I think most don't. I just sort of came out excited and eager and, looked for classes, was teaching classes. And at that point where I was teaching 10 classes was like, okay, well, I was just scraping by. But like if there was any kind of emergency or a computer breaking or anything, I was like, oh no. So eventually I went up to about 15 classes a week, which some people apparently, I hear rumor, can do quite easily. Not for my introverted, sensitive self. 15 classes a week. When I was teaching that many classes, I was constantly either in burnout or on the verge of burnout. And I was exhausted. And sometimes I actually felt like I was losing my mind, just because I was picking up so much energy from all of those people. And at the time, I didn't have any ways to sort of clear that. And so I loved what I did, but I was living paycheck to paycheck. I was broke. And I just, I remember it really clearly because it was an Easter weekend, which meant, because in Canada, some people get Easter Monday. And so it meant I would have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and a Monday off, which never happened for me. I was teaching 6 days a week at that time. And so although I was really looking forward to having the extra time and I desperately needed the rest, when I added up those classes missed, it meant that month, my groceries was going to have to go on my credit card. And I remember very clearly, sorry, I'm trying not to get verklempt while I'm talking about it. It was a very emotional experience, actually. Mm-hmm. I remember literally falling to the floor crying. And I couldn't understand why, if I was teaching this much, I wasn't able to pay my bills. Like, this is the part of the industry that they don't tell you in teacher training. It's mm-hmm. that, how am I see yoga teachers out there that are drinking green smoothies and going on vacation and teaching yoga full time. So like, there has to be a way to do this. But this model of just get another class, just get another class, just get another class is not working. And so it was kind of a bit of a crisis, actually, a crisis of faith for me. I was really, really torn because I knew this is what I was meant to do. And yet I was broke and stressed and burnt out.
Yeah. So thanks for sharing that, Nick.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of heads will nod when they hear this.
I mean, I was nodding my head. We don't have video on, but I mean, that was very similar to my experience, and I didn't crunch the numbers either. And I was like, wait, what? How am I ever going to make enough money doing this? And I had the same thing. Yeah, I was like, these people are, wearing expensive yoga clothes and spending $7 on a smoothie after class. And like, how is this working? Like, I need to figure out what they're doing because what I'm doing is not working.
Exactly. And so although it was, and I'm not exaggerating when I say it was a pivotal moment in my life, because it was the first time that I knew I was on the right path, and yet my results were not showing that. But yet I knew that I was on the right path. It was a very long weekend. Lots of crying, lots of laying in bed, lots of just confusion and feeling like, like something was wrong with my soul's path. Like, am I wrong? Am I not supposed to be doing this? But I knew I was. And then by the last day and a half, that sadness had turned to pissed off. And I was like, no. I am meant to do this. I know this because I can feel it when I'm at the front of the room. And I know it because I hear the feedback from my students about how much this practice has changed their life and how much they were able to hear it because of my voice. So I know I'm supposed to be doing this. So there has to be a better way. And until that moment hit, I didn't know that there had to be a better way because I wasn't looking for it. I was just scrambling to get another class. Let's just get another class. Let's just, like the treadmill of add another class. And so I started doing some work on my business. I started realizing that it was actually the business side of the yoga that I needed to pay more attention to. That I was always really eager to sign up for another workshop on how to teach this or different poses, but that I hadn't spent any time actually studying business. And so that became sort of my mission. And I went to one of the very, very first things that I did was, and a shout out to another Albertan, Tad Hardgrave from Marketing for Hippies. Some friend had told me about him, and he had this day-long pay what you can workshop because he works with holistic and entrepreneurs and permaculture people and yoga teachers and those of us that probably aren't super in the flush, especially when we're coming to him. And so he does this on a pay what you can model, which is really interesting. So I signed up for that workshop, and it began a study of my business. And I'm always studying on my business. I'm always working on my business. And I now finally have started consulting with yoga teachers, to help them in their business, which just sort of organically fell into my lap. But I said, okay, I'm going to take a full year with no yoga workshops, no more yoga trainings. I'm diving 100% of my time and money into figuring out how to get this business going so that I can, wear organic cotton leggings and have a green smoothie and go on vacations and still teach yoga, and maybe have some money in the bank,
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my mission and it started with Tad, and then I just kept going. I mean, I signed up for every free webinar, every, devoured YouTube things, podcasts, and just went for it. And then eventually I ended up in B school about 2 years, maybe not quite 2 years later, which I could not afford at the time. But I knew that I had kind of gone as far as I could go business-wise on my own, and that I needed a little bit of more direction. And so I signed up for that. And then it just kept going, so it was a great program, but of course it wasn't yoga specific. But I did learn a lot about mistakes that I was making, on my website, and just how I wasn't actually talking to my ideal student with my website and with all of my marketing, really. But of course, your website is, sort of your online home, and it's the representation of you and your business, and often the first place that people land when they're searching you out. And so I hadn't been very conscious or strategic with my website. I just kind of threw some stuff up there. And when I went in that marketing workshop with Tad, he asked if anybody wanted, their websites looked at, and he looked at mine and he was like, yeah, so here's some things that I'll recommend. He was so diplomatic about it, but, so I took some of those in place, and then I did some more things. I bought a writing workbook so that I could, because writing your own website copy is actually really hard.
Totally.
Yeah. I mean, I think the two hardest pages you'll ever write on your website are your homepage and your about page. Like, they're so hard.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
I bought kind of.
And they never feel perfect either. It's like you look at them and you feel like happy with it for like 5 minutes, and then you're like, no, something's off.
I've realized that websites, much like us, are always in a process of becoming, but never actually are.
100%. Yeah, that's very true.
But I did learn some I learned some common mistakes that I was making. And I learned what I needed to switch. And then I just had to kind of resource some help with copy to be able to, find my words and to switch it up. And immediately when I switched my website up, not only from my existing students was I getting oh, your website, oh my gosh, I could totally relate to that. But I actually started getting more traffic because people were referring their friends. And then any sort of organic traffic that I was getting was actually, people were actually landing and staying. Whereas before, people would probably have, barely scrolled them and like out of there. And so I really learned that other than meeting someone in person, and even then they're going to go check your website out, this is the sign of the times, that spending a lot of time being very conscious and very deliberate on my website copy and my photos was making a massive difference just as to how many clients it was bringing me, and also the sense of resonance with the clients I was attracting. So I'm sure you have a gazillion podcasts where niching is mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's a pretty common topic.
yeah, I know. And for those of you that are Americans, in Canada, we say niching, not niching. You know, I had a niche, but it wasn't conscious and it wasn't deliberate, and I wasn't speaking to them on my website. So if my ideal student would to land on my website, they weren't getting a sense of, oh, this is for me. And so I switched all of that, and I spent, like I said, hours and hours and hours trying to, you know, take advice from many sources and then kind of collect it together and figure out, like, okay, how can I make this website speak to my students, and be really, like, you know, simple and functional, and have people know right away when they're on my website, either, oh, this is for me, or nope, this isn't for me. And that's sort of the intention for me with my website now, is that very quickly people know they're either in the right spot, or they're like, oh, nope, this isn't my teacher. And both are great.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think that something that's always really resonated with me is, you know, knowing your niche and knowing who your client is and who you want to talk to, and not getting kind of bombarded by all the other noise. Because I think sometimes it can be really scary to be like, oh, well, if I'm only talking to this person, what about all the other people that come here? And it's like, well, you might have other people that come and are actually connecting with your words, but you're really losing out on the people that you do want to attract by not using the words that are for them, and not having something that's specifically for them. Because I think people just feel really confused about if something is for them if they don't clearly understand it, because they skim, they move quickly, they'll just click around a little bit. And if they aren't immediately like, you know, this is my place, this is my home, this is my teacher, you know, you may have lost a client. And so I always say, like, and this is certainly not my quote, I heard this elsewhere, but if you're trying to attract everyone, you're actually attracting no one.
Mm-hmm. I can't agree with that more. Even if you're not consciously niching, you're still niching, because
Mm-hmm.
nobody is going to love everyone. So when you aren't consciously niching, you're still going to attract certain people and not other people, just based on who you are as a person. And so even though you don't think you're niching, you are. You're just not being conscious and deliberate about it. And I would much rather be conscious and deliberate about who I'm drawing in. And that's sort of what started to shift when I started really looking at my business. Was, first of all, I didn't have to identify a niche, because I was already teaching and I had already drawn an audience, but I had to try to figure out who they were. Because when I looked at them, according to all the kind of traditional marketing standards, like demographics and age bracket and, you know, all these things, it's like I couldn't make the connection, because, you know, I had for, especially for yoga, I had a fair number of guys, which is unusual, but I also had women. I had different age brackets. I had different tax brackets, lifestyle, and so when I would look at them under like a traditional lens, I could not figure out what they had in common. And it took me probably about a year of literally every time they were in Shavasana, me looking at them all going, what do you have in common with you? And like, what about my class brought you here and you here and you here? And that took quite a while. And then finally, when you start to get curious about this, you'll start noticing that your students have actually been telling you little messages the whole time. And so I started hearing what my students were saying, asking for videos, and me saying, oh, you know, check out this. This is back in the, you know, days before there was, again, yoga on YouTube. And I was like, oh, check out this video and check out this DVD. And they're like, yeah, but they don't teach like you do. And then finally I started getting curious and saying, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by like I do? And it turns out that I attract what I call now yoga misfits. People who would not normally seek yoga out, probably not overly comfortable in a yoga studio, and don't actually think they're yoga people. And so I ended up realizing that was the common element, but it took a long time, because of course they all were so different and diverse. And yet There was that key element that they were very much not. The standard would be that they definitely did not think they were yoga people.
Yeah. That's really
Yeah.
interesting. Whenever I teach this, I try to get people to the point where they could pick their dream student or their ideal client out at the grocery store. And I was just thinking as you were talking how, I have a business degree and with a marketing major. And, we did a lot of that, like, where are they located? What is their demographic? What is their income bracket? All these things about them, which can help in some cases. But it's so cool as you were talking, because I was just imagining like the local Save on Foods here, and all of a sudden I could like see who your people were. And it's cool how, there can be stuff that's not just necessarily that demographic or some of those other maybe distinguishing characters, but really getting to know these people and understanding like what makes them similar yet different and what makes them your student.
Totally. I love the grocery store analogy. That's great. And it's true, actually, because when I'm out on the street, I mean, they may not know it because they're not all in my classes yet, but I can walk around right away and be like, oh yeah, you're my peeps. You over there? I should start making a calling card that I can hand them.
Yeah, I love it.
Don't think yoga's for you? Come see me. But yeah, definitely, I can see them right away. And I'm like, aha, yeah. And
That's
so
amazing.
Once I was able to identify that, then I was able to rework my website so that it completely focused on that. And that's when I started really diving into my website and being really conscious and really deliberate about it. And I would say that B School, that was probably my biggest aha from B School. And I'm certainly not saying everyone should run and join B School, because although it was a good program, it's not yoga specific. And I just think now there's so many more yoga teachers like yourself, like myself, like several of our friends that are helping yoga teachers with their business, so that you would get all that information without, having to take that. But at the time, there wasn't a lot of yoga teachers marketing to other yoga teachers and helping them with their business. So I dove into that, and it really helped me craft my website and understand also what happens when a client visits my website, and some of the common mistakes that I was falling into, and that I still see 90% of yoga teachers' websites. When I jump on, I'm like, oh, so many missed opportunities here.
I am so excited to welcome back Offering Tree as our sponsor. You've heard me talk about them in the past, and many of you are already among their growing community of happy Offering Tree users. With everything that goes into running your yoga business, Offering Tree created a single platform that can solve all your marketing and time management headaches. With a single account, you can create a website in minutes, set up a newsletter, create a blog, schedule classes, and take payment. The great part is that all of Offering Tree's features work seamlessly together, so you don't need to pay for and manage 5 different services. Instead, you get it all in one easy, affordable package. And now, the big news. Offering Tree makes it easy for you to manage memberships: annual, semi-annual, tiered offerings. Regardless of types of memberships you offer, you can create them in Offering Tree with the ease of use Offering Tree is becoming famous for. This amazing platform was built by yogis, so you know they get it. Offering Tree also provides helpful tutorials and webinars to keep you growing as a teacher. It's part of their mission as a public benefit corporation. I love their product and their company. They're providing special pricing for MBOM listeners. So if you want to spend more time teaching and less time managing your digital presence, then check them out at offeringtree.com/MBOM. Again, that's offeringtree.com/MBOM. All right, now back to the episode. Yeah. Can we dive into that a little bit and talk about some of those mistakes?
Yeah, I'd love to. So the first one that I would say, and maybe the most obvious one, is that when someone lands on your homepage, they say that you have, and it depends on the stat, whoever they are, these experts. Some of them will say you have less than 2 minutes to grab someone's attention. Some people will say it's less than 1 minute. So people now, as you know, if we look at our own habits, are super busy, and our attention spans are short, and they're getting even shorter. And so initially, when someone lands on your homepage, you don't have very much time to grab them right there and let them know you were in the right place, or you know what, you're not in the right place. And again, like I said, both are good because there's plenty of yoga teachers there. And so if they're around, so if they're not a good fit for you, then they'll go to the next person and see if they're a right fit. So you have less than 2 minutes for sure to grab someone's attention before they click away. And the biggest mistake that I see that most yoga teachers make is their homepage is either immediately sort of a services page, like here's my classes, or it's all about them and their journey to yoga, or what they believe about yoga, or what they think that yoga will do for people. And so the analogy that I often use when I do this workshop, I do a workshop in person on websites. And the analogy I often use is, and I can use you as an example, imagine, Amanda, that I've invited you over for dinner. And you've arrived and I've opened the door and you're just barely in the entryway. And I haven't even taken your coat yet. And I'm starting to tell you my whole life story. Kind of doesn't feel very good. Right. And when you're going to be like, can I take off my coat? Can I come in for a while before, and like, oh, hi, remember me, your guest that you invited here? So this is the analogy I use because this is what it feels like when somebody jumps on your website and the very first thing that they see is all about your journey to yoga and you as a teacher. Now, there is a place for that, but it's not your homepage. Your homepage needs to speak directly to your ideal client. So why are they there? What are their needs? What are their concerns? What's troubling them? And what can you do to help them? That all needs to be on the homepage. They should immediately know they're in the right place or they're not. And there should be a feeling of resonance. When they read your words, they should feel like, oh, yes, that's me. She's talking to me. So that's the first mistake, is that most people treat their homepage kind of like it's an about page and not actually a homepage. So your homepage should immediately let them know that they are in the right place and that they are welcome there. And then it should invite them in. So in that same analogy, if instead of just meeting you at the door and then starting to tell you my whole life story, I said, I'm so glad you're here. Come in. How can I make you more comfortable? Let me take your coat. Can I bring you something to drink? Why don't you sit and stay a while? So this is what we want our homepage to do. We want it to invite our ideal clients in so that they actually kind of want to sit down on your website and, look around for a little bit. And that's the whole goal for me of a homepage, is to let the right people know that they're there, and the people that maybe aren't a good fit to know that they're not in the right spot.
Mm-hmm. Right. Like it's kind of like if the person shows up at the wrong apartment, you're kind of immediately like, oh, sorry, you've got the wrong place, and you don't waste their time by inviting them in. And, then they're like, oh, my friends aren't here. Like, oh, shoot, I'm at the wrong party.
At the wrong party. Or, maybe you're making a new friend and say you came over to my house and I did treat you that way. You might be like, gee, I kind of thought that Nick girl was cool, but she's kind of rude to me when I came over. I don't really think I want to go over to her house again.
Right. Yeah. I love the host party analogy because I feel like, all of us can relate really well to having all types of experiences. Like I think we can all relate to having that friend that you see them, they just immediately talk about themselves and you're like, hey, I just drove like an hour. Could I use your bathroom before we dive into this type thing? Could I get a glass of water? So yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
So your homepage, instead of being all about you, should be all about them. And whenever possible, using their words. So one of the activities that I love to tell people to do is that when they have found their ideal client, whether it's 1 or 3, is to actually interview them and to write down some of the words that they use, because their words are way better than your words if you're trying to speak to them. So one example is, I was out not too long ago, and I live in Victoria, and I was at a little cafe that I go to often, a little breakfast place. And one of the servers there is totally my niche, just 100%. I look at him and I'm like, yep, you're it. And we often talk back and forth, and because we are similar enough, we've given each other the knowing nod a few times where it's like, oh yeah, I see you, you're my people. And so he served me many times, and finally one time I just asked him, I was like, hey, do you practice yoga? And he looked at me and was like, I probably should, because my back is killing me from serving. But here's the thing. And he put his hand on his heart and he said, I like yoga, but I don't like yoga people. He's like, I'm not granola. You better believe granola is now on my advertising. I'm not granola. So, I work with, like I said, with misfits. So people who don't feel like they're yoga people. And, of course, one of the stereotypes about yoga is that, you have to be a hippie, or you have to have the right yoga outfit. And so once you become really clear on who your people are, then you can actually interview them and use their words on your homepage. And then when they land there, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, this person is in my head. How did they know? And that's what you want, because then you're inviting them in. You're saying, hey, you are welcome here. Come on in, get comfortable, kick off your shoes, have a seat, grab a beverage. Let's hang out for a while. So that's homepage mistake. Biggest homepage mistake is that you're talking about you, not about your guest. And then the second most common mistake that I see is that people don't write their about page in the first person.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, so if that's unclear, if your bio is written like, Sally fell in love with yoga after attending her first yoga class. Instead, it should be, I fell in love with yoga after attending my first yoga class. So this is your website. Now, it's a little bit different if you have a studio, although even then, I think that definitely having your mission and your goals and your love and things like that should be in your copy. But if you're an individual teacher, this is your website. And this should sound like you are just having a conversation directly with the reader. When you use third person language, it puts up sort of an invisible wall, or like, a piece of plexiglass between you and your client. So having it written in the first person doesn't feel as intimate. It's like there's something standing between you and the people you're trying to reach. So definitely, I would say the biggest mistake with the about page is that people they think that their about page needs to be like a formal bio that someone would read about them if they were doing a TED Talk. And that is not the case at all. It should feel really real and relatable, and it should be written as if it's coming from you in your own words.
Yeah.
Using your own voice and in the first person, so that it's clear that you are just, it's like you've now invited them in. They've come over, they're in the door. They've taken off their coat. They've sat down on the couch. They've got a nice beverage of choice, and they're now on your homepage or in your about page, because now they're like, wow, this is real. I feel really good here. I'd like to know more about you. And so you wouldn't suddenly start speaking to them in this like overly formal tone, or sort of separating yourself. You would just sit down with them and have like a real conversation using your own words. And that is sort of the second most common mistake that I see, is that people are treating their about page like some sort of formal professional bio. And I'm not saying that you can't have, some of your training and your certification in there, but I think, although that's valid, and I have that on my website too, it's far more important actually to have, what do you believe about yoga? And what brought you to yoga, and what you think yoga does for you and for your clients, and all in the first person. It should be quite heartfelt and quite personal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. This is something that I completely agree with, and something that I also teach, because I feel like it just, like when I read teachers' bios where it's like, and, I have a third person bio that I give to people for, things like podcast interviews and stuff, because it could also be weird if, I'm reading your bio in first person or vice versa. But like for the sake of reading it out loud. But on
Yes.
websites, I just feel like I think about it exactly like you said, as a home or a storefront. Like it would be so weird if I had you over to my house and then talked about myself in the third person. Oh, it'd just
Totally.
be like, I mean, everyone can relate to like how uncomfortable that would be. And I think that obviously it's less weird on a website, but I do feel like it feels a little bit rigid versus somebody who has, you know, really real photos, which I know we're going to talk about next. And then also this like very just personal experience and being able to say, like, this is why I'm passionate about what I do. Like, this is how I got here. This is what I believe. That stuff is what really connects us as humans. And I think that's what makes people want to join you for a yoga class.
100% agree. Yeah, it should definitely. I mean, and yes, we need a formal bio that's in the third person. Like you said, if you're ever being interviewed or if you write a guest blog post somewhere, I mean, you obviously you want that one, to be as if someone else wrote it about you. But on your own website, it feels really, really weird
Mm-hmm.
and sort of almost lacks intimacy.
Yeah, 100%. And so I know mistake number 3 is around photos. Can you tell me a little bit about what this mistake is?
Okay, so I see this one now that I'm on the West Coast, like all the time. Um, all of the pictures, your photos, what are they selling? So are they selling the forest, the beach, or the mountains? Are the pictures on your website of you doing the most advanced pose that you can muster in the forest or on the beach? If so, I'm going to say that that's probably not ideal for a few reasons. One, that's not real because now this could be possible, unless you actually do teach all your yoga classes on the beach, then by all means, you should have your pictures on the beach. If you do, forest hikes and then yoga as part of your business model, then yes, 100% you should have those pictures on your website. But if you, like most urban yogis, are going to a studio and teaching in a studio, then that's what your pictures should look like. If you're going to show pictures of you, it should be you, doing yoga. These really gorgeous sort of Instagrammable photos of like the yogi in the white bikini on the beach. Frankly, it's an overdone trend and it starts to become not relatable. And it's like a generic yoga teacher stereotype. But again, like I said, if you actually do teach on the beach, or if you teach like, sup yoga or surfing in yoga, then of course that makes sense to have the beach and the ocean in your pictures. Or same thing with the forest. And also, I don't think that we need a bunch of fancy photos. And I also would argue, depending upon your niche, so depending on who you teach, that you in the most advanced yoga pose that you can do is actually probably intimidating to your ideal client, unless you teach specifically that's your niche. If you teach sort of, intermediate and advanced asana, if you are all about the handstands and the crow poses and the things like that, then of course that makes sense to have that. But if you teach regular folk and they come onto your website, those that are new or maybe aren't so flexible, and all they see are pictures of you in these like extreme bendy poses in this idyllic locations, there's no sense of realness to that.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, it's going to be intimidating and off-putting. So I don't think you need a bunch of fancy photos, and I don't think they need to be these, landscape portraits with a little yogi in them. A simple headshot is good. Doesn't have to be super fancy, but something for social media and maybe the bio that you have. A picture of you in a realistic yoga pose, maybe for sort of your main header image, and then it's nice to have like a personal lifestyle shot. So if you do like quiet evenings walking on the beach, this might be the time to bring out the beach, or a picture of you with your dog or reading a book or whatever sort of more personal elements or pastimes that you involve in. And those are great for your about page, because we just said, your about page is ideally going to be a bit informal and inviting and intimate. And so having like a picture of you sort of in your life, is a great place to have that. And if you can manage more pictures than that, that's great. Another great idea, and not many of us can do this, myself included, it's been challenging to do, but If you can manage more pictures, getting a photographer to take pictures of you actually teaching a class of your ideal students is great.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you'd have to tell them that that's what's happening and they have to sign media waivers. But, telling your students, hey, I'd really like to have you represented on my website. I'd love to do this photo shoot. And that's something that I'm looking at doing in the future, so that, all of the group class shots are of my actual students.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I was just teaching in the business of yoga for a 300-hour training, and we've been in quarantine for the last couple of months, and so I had these students make a website, and a lot of them were like, "But we don't have photos," and I was like, "It doesn't need to be fancy. Like, find a nice wall or go out. You know, they're in Vancouver. Vancouver has so many cool spaces, and like just go for a walk with your partner or your roommate, whoever you're with." And find like a cool brick wall and like take a
Mm-hmm.
photo there. It doesn't need to be super fancy or elaborate. And it was really cool to see what they came up with, considering that none of them could get professional photo shoots done, really. I know portrait photo shoots, or not portrait, like porch photo shoots have been, kind of a trend that's happened over the last
Yeah,
couple of months. But yeah, I just think that it doesn't need to be these like, you don't have to master like Scorpion to be able to get a photo shoot done. And I really agree with you that I think people really connect with things that they can see themselves doing. And I think for a lot of us, myself included, I mean, when I see that stuff, that makes me feel very intimidated. And I'm like pretty well practiced. And I also understand like the draw of that and how that's probably not what the class is actually going to be about. And that it's just, a photo that they're using because it's like pretty and showy and it looks cool.
totally agree. Yeah, like your pictures on your website shouldn't be to impress other yoga teachers,
Definitely not.
right?
Unless that's like your ideal client. I think maybe
Yeah, I
there's
mean,
the exception of
yeah,
maybe if you're trying to get yoga teachers and teach them how to do, advanced asana, maybe then that works. But yeah,
yeah,
100% agree.
yeah. I mean, they should be, speaking to your ideal client. So yeah, that's a bit about photos. And again, like you said, I mean, our camera phones now are so good compared to like what they used to be, that like if you have the budget for a photographer when it's safe to do so wherever you live. I know with COVID, a lot of people are still not sort of out as much, but depending on when people are listening to this, your camera phone is actually pretty good. So get some good natural lighting, get a friend, take a few shots. You can always change the photos later if you do get some more professional photos, but they just need to be clear, just need to be able to see you. They don't have to be fancy.
Yeah, 100%.
So, and then the next thing that I will often see is, and I get that most of us as yoga teachers are making our own websites. I do myself as well. I mean, I do have somebody that can do sort of any of the fancier stuff that I need, like coding, but I update my own website. But if you're not conscious and deliberate about it, and you don't kind of do some planning ahead of time, then homemade websites can look like sort of a hodgepodge of colors and pictures and fonts. Like there's different fonts on each page, and it can kind of start to look like a high school scrapbook rather than your professional website. So I'm certainly not saying that you need to go and hire a professional to do this. I think there's so many good ways to do your own websites now, but it can still look intentional and polished and professional. So with colors, I wouldn't use more than 3 colors, and that's including your neutrals. So if you can have a couple neutrals and then one, color that you like to work with a lot, that will be more soothing to the eye, depending, of course, on the color you choose. But also, people will then start to recognize that as you, as part of your branding. So I recommend no more than 3 colors, and that I would include neutral. Also with fonts. So you really don't need more than 2 fonts. 1 font for your body text and 1 font for your header. Don't get creative and start pulling in like a different font for each page. And it just becomes a bit hard to read and a bit jarring to the eyes. And again, with our website, we want to invite people in and we want them to feel comfortable, and we want it to be easy to read. And you want to have some consistency with your branding, with your colors and your fonts throughout your website.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think you can do this like, there's a lot of great templates on, website software companies like Offering Tree, Wix,
Mm-hmm.
Squarespace. I mean, I like WordPress quite a bit, but if you're new to it, I feel like those other ones are a lot simpler to use and you can make really clean looking websites. And I feel like they do a lot of, this type of work for you. So I feel like you almost kind of have to go out of your way to add a bunch of stuff that kind of brings in different colors and brings in different fonts and stuff like that. And when I work with yoga teachers that kind of struggle with this, it's just like, okay, let's go through each page and make sure that everything's really feeling aligned. So, I mean, I guess if you continue with like the apartment or the house party analogy, it's kind of like if somebody invited you on a tour of their apartment. I mean, everyone's houses are different, but in general, it's like there would kind of be a similar kind of vibe throughout the whole apartment if it was decorated well, right? Like, other than maybe like a kid's room. So there are some exceptions to this, but you'd probably like walk into the kitchen. Maybe they have, gray cupboards and, granite countertops. And then you go in the bathroom and there's probably similar countertops and tiles. And, it's not like you're going to go in and all of a sudden the carpet's going to be blue. And then you walk in the bathroom and like the bathtub's hot pink. And then you walk in the next room and the wall is green. And hopefully I'm not offending a listener who's like, that's what my house looks like. And I love it. If that's you, that's cool. I'm fine with that. But unless that's an intentional part of your website or your brand, in general, you want to try and think about like if an interior designer came through and did like if Bobby Burke came from Queer Eye, what is he going to do? You know what I mean?
Actually, I think the fact that you said kids' room is the perfect example, because a lot of times when I look at websites that are done yourself, they look like a kid's bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit of like this color, that color, and this font and that, and it's just kind of a little bit jarring to the eyes. What I usually do when I'm working with people is I actually get them to make like a Pinterest board, or if they're not on Pinterest, just like a file folder where they go on Google Fonts, pour themselves a drink of something they love on an evening and go on Google Fonts and just kind of look at fonts. I mean, if depending on what website platform you're using, you may not be able to do custom fonts, but sometimes you can, like with WordPress, you can. But yeah, just look at fonts, or even within your standard list of fonts that you can get on something else that's an easier template. Like, choose two that kind of speak to you more, and just stick to those two, one for the header, one for the body, and just keep it super simple. Same with colors. You don't need to have all your favorite colors on your website, especially if you have many favorite colors. Let's pick a couple neutral colors, and then one sort of color that is going to visually represent you, and then it just looks clean and easy to look at. And again, like you said, then when people are touring around, whether they're on page 1 of your website or page 10, or on your blog, things have this sort of cohesive theme.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That totally makes sense. And so then moving into the fifth mistake, what is our last final mistake that people make on their websites that you see the most?
That they're not collecting email addresses of the people that visit their site.
Mm-hmm. This is a big one.
This is a big one.
This is an important one. A really important one.
It's so important, especially because, and I don't know when this will go live, so we may still be dealing with some of the post-corona stuff or not. But one of the things that really gave me a sense of stability when Corona hit is the fact that I have an email list. So I could email my list and say, hey, how'd you like to do some Zoom classes? If I didn't have that list of my students and I was dependent 100% on the studios, I would have had no way to create that. So oftentimes you'll hear, and I don't know who these so-called marketing experts are saying that email is dead. I would like to know who they are, because I don't think they know what they're talking about.
They're people who are selling something different.
Yeah, they're probably selling you an Instagram course or something, right?
Yeah, totally.
I'm not knocking social media. Social media is great. It's a great way to bring people to your website. But here's another analogy I use. Let's just say somebody is brand new to a city. and they want some yoga. What's the first thing they're going to do? They're going to Google. Now, let's just say you were lucky enough that they stumbled onto your website. They are your ideal client. They found your website. They're going to read it and they're going to be like, oh, this is great. This sounds like these would be really great classes. Okay, I'll come back to that. And then tomorrow or next week, they're like, wait, what was the name of that studio? Or what was the name of that teacher? The one with the website? Oh, dang it. And they don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
So you've basically let your ideal client just leave without saying, hey, would you like to come back sometime? So if you're not collecting email addresses of the people who visit your site, you have no way to contact your students when you have things to offer them or just to add value to their lives. You don't own Instagram and you don't own Facebook. And goodness knows any of us that have had a business page on Facebook for more than 5 years know that they're changing stuff all the time to the point where it doesn't even really get seen anymore unless you're paying for ads. So, you can't rely on just having social media as a way to connect with your people, because social media can change. It can go away. I mean, some of us might be old enough to remember MySpace, no longer a thing. So if all your connections were on MySpace, you'd be in trouble right now. So email is still the queen when it comes to reaching your community on a regular basis. Yoga teachers who collect emails on their websites and send out newsletters have twice as many registrants on average in their classes, workshops, and events. Twice as many. So never assume that people are regularly checking your website. They're busy. It should not be their job to come back and check your website to see what you have going on. That's your job. That's your job to send them a lovely email that says, hey, here's what's up. So never assume that people are regularly checking your website. Never assume that, social media is going to stay. People are busy. Make it easy for them to stay in the loop. And, there's always the debate of to pop up or not to pop up, those pop-ups that can be quite obnoxious. But whether you choose to have a pop-up or whether you choose to just have a little email opt-in, maybe I like to actually say to have it at the top of your page, maybe just in your photo or in some copy, and then also at the bottom of each page, so that once they've read your whole homepage or your whole about page, then it's right there saying, sign up for my email list. So that right there, when they're at the bottom, they can just add their information. I personally I was pop-up averse for many, many, many years, and I hated them. And then I realized that there is a way that you can do polite pop-ups. They don't have to be obnoxious and intrusive. And so I do have them now. And I noticed that when I didn't have a pop-up versus when I do, that I actually get twice as many people on my email list with my pop-up. So
I felt the same way as you when I first started a website. I remember when we started our travel podcast, my husband was like, who I co-host with, he was like, we need to have this and have our freebie and stuff. And I was like, oh, it's so annoying when websites do that though. And so he was like, okay, well, I was like, let's just make like a newsletter page or something. And nobody was signing up. And so I was like, fine, let's try the pop-up. And then that's when we started getting people actually signing up. So I think you can do it in a way that feels very graceful, elegant, in line with your brand, something that's very easy for people to exit out of, and it's not too intrusive. So I definitely wouldn't be averse to that. And I also love what you're saying about having it in multiple locations. I think it's nice, if somebody doesn't want the pop-up or they miss it, or, they scroll past like the top, having another opportunity for them to sign up is a really great idea.
Yeah, the first thing I did with this new website, and I think my web designer was a little bit confused when I got her to create the framework. And I was like, you cannot be anywhere on my website and not have an option to sign up for my newsletter list. Like, my whole goal of my website is, number one, let people know if they're in the right place or not. If they're like, yes, I'm a misfit, I want to work with you. Number two, get on the email list. That's it. It's like, that's the goal. Once they're in the right spot and they're feeling that resonance, is to get them on the list. And so I have it everywhere, because I used to, on my former website, I had it at the bottom of the page and I had it up in my banner photo, and I would still have people email me through my contact form and say, how can I stay in the loop about your classes? And I was like,
oh my gosh,
like, for real? Really? Like, what? So that's when I realized that, like, okay, the polite pop-up, and you can totally make them polite. You can set a timer so that, because I think we've all had this experience where you're on Facebook, you click, you want to read some article, and like you haven't even read the title, and then bam, there's this big obnoxious pop-up blocking all the text, and you can't figure out how to X out of it. And now you're just like, oh, forget it. I don't want to read that article anymore. So it doesn't have to be like that. It can be timed so that people have actually been able to read and scroll for a bit. You can even get pop-ups that only show up when someone's about to leave that page. There's lots of like play within the pop-ups. They don't need to be annoying. They could be polite.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree with that. And I feel like this is a good place to wrap up our conversation. You've shared so much good information today, Nick, and I'm so grateful for this conversation and everything that you've shared with me today. Where can people go to find you and learn more about you? What is your website, social media, all that good stuff?
So because I know you work with teachers, I have 2 segments to my website. So if you go to nykdanu.com, nykdanu.com, as soon as you do that, there's going to be a button there that says teacher or student. And if you click teachers, you'll end up on my teachers side of my website. And I do some business consulting with yoga teachers, especially around niching, website and branding, and then marketing. And then I also am a yin yoga teacher trainer. So I also teach teachers how to teach yin. And so all of that you can find on my website. I do have a Facebook business page, but to be honest, not much traction happens there. But I do love me some Instagram. And on that, I'm just at Nick Danu Yoga.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. I'll make sure there's links to all of this in the show notes. And thank you so much for this conversation today, Nick.
Oh, thank you so much for your time.
All right, friends, I hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast with Nick Danu. She has so much great information to share. Now, before we finish up this episode, I just wanted to pop in and chat quickly about this week's MBO Behind the Scenes podcast episode. If you're not familiar with MBO Behind the Scenes, you should go check it out. It's at patreon.com/MBO Yoga, and it's the behind the scenes bonus podcast with exclusive content from each week's episode of the show. Now, over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking with the same guests, or I've been doing solo episodes really closely related to the week's episode. Now, Nick did a fabulous job talking about websites, and honestly, you've heard me talk about websites a million times. So this week, I have a really amazing bonus episode. It's a full-length episode of the show with Mado Hesselink. Mado is the host and founder of Yoga Teacher Resource. She has an amazing podcast, amazing courses, workshops, membership. She is an outstanding yoga business coach, and she's also an expert on workshops. So in this special bonus episode of the podcast, she is talking all about workshops, how to create successful workshops, how to run successful workshops, and really have workshops that you feel excited about that you're selling to your students. So this is an amazing bonus episode. I know you're going to love it. So head on over to patreon.com/MBO Yoga and check it out. During the episode, you also heard from Offering Tree, and Offering Tree is the perfect solution for a yoga teacher website. So if you want to start teaching more and managing less, head on over to offeringtree.com/MBO to get an exclusive discount. And as always, thank you so much to Offering Tree for supporting the show. And thank you to you for listening. I'll see you next week. Namaste. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the podcast. To find links, notes, resources, and everything mentioned in today and all episodes of the show, you can head on over to mbomyoga.com. You can find the podcast and myself on Facebook and social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And I would love for you to join the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badasses. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please make sure you reach out to me at info@mbomyoga.com. And last of all, if you enjoyed this episode of the show, please make sure you hit subscribe and leave a review for the podcast. It would mean the world. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.